Now in this video we're going to take a look at frames per second. If we move back over to our game and we switch on our stats, you've actually got the FPS right here. So it's actually showing you in terms of your graphics how many frames per second you're getting. So if I press play, bear in mind in the game I won't be able to interact with this item. So if I click and drag on it, oh, actually I can, which is interesting. Okay, I'm getting roughly about 500 frames per second, 400, something like that, and that's because I'm running on a PC. Now if I were to export this now, put it onto a mobile phone, it's going to run at around 30 frames per second, maybe less on some phones, but I think there's hardly anything in it at the moment, so I should imagine it's going to hit at least 30 frames per second. But by default your phone actually limits your frames per second to 30. Okay, there is a way to override that. We can have a target frame rate and get it to run faster than its default, so we can get it to run at about 60 frames per second instead. I suppose the mobile phones try and limit it to about 30 frames per second so it's not overloading the CPU or the graphics card, so that it doesn't get too hot. Alright, by going above that up to 60 frames per second, there is always, you know, the situation whereby the phone could get really hot and then it has to cool itself down, so it starts to limit your frames per second. That's usually when you start to see that dip, when it goes down to like 10 frames per second, 8, 5, 2. It's simply because the phone's too hot. It's trying to cool itself down. So that's the reason why it's limiting that. But what we're going to do, we're going to go back into our main. In our start, we're actually going to set our own frames per second. So we're going to type application dot set. Oh, actually no, sorry, it's not set, it's target frame rate. Okay, and then I can make that equal 60. You can actually set that to anything you want. If you wanted 1000 frames per second, you could do that. I probably would never try that with the mobile, to be honest. If you try and get it to run at around 1000 frames per second, there's a pretty good chance it's going to heat up and just instantly kill your frames per second, and they'll be down at 1 or 2 almost immediately. 60 frames per second is achievable on most mobile devices. So if I press save now and then switch my stats back on and press play, you will notice these should now cap out at about 60. There we go. 59, it's getting as close as it can to 60, but it's not going above that. Alright, now I do have a script, so if I go into assets and into the mobile game resources, we've got an FPS counter. I'm just going to drag this onto the canvas. This script came directly from the standard assets, and it's there in order to basically display your frames per second on screen. So now I can go back to my simulator, and when I press play in the top left hand corner, we should see it now displaying your frames per second. It's got straight up to 60, and because this is running by script, it's actually more reliable than the stats element. It also means that when we're on mobile, we can be displaying our frames per second as we're playing through this. Okay, but at the moment you can see I'm hitting a constant 60 frames per second. All we're interested in is mobile is that we stay above 30 frames per second if possible. 60 is going to help us to achieve that.